My wife told everyone I walked away from the marriage. She did not say it loudly. She did not need to. She said it the way smart people do, with a sigh and a half smile, like she was embarrassed to admit it, like she was protecting me by not saying more. I did everything I could, she told them, but you can't hold on to someone who has already checked out. People nodded. People always nod when you give them a sentence that feels complete. I was not in the room when she said it the first time. I heard it from my son, who said it casually, the way you repeat weather. Mom says you decided to leave, he told me on the phone. She says you needed space. Space, that word again. That word people use when they want distance without blame. I did not correct him. I let the story move. I let it pick up speed. I let it smooth its edges as it passed from mouth to mouth. I watched people look at me differently in the grocery store. I noticed the pauses in conversations when I walked into a room. I felt the way silence followed me now, like I had brought it in on my shoes. I did not fight it. I had learned a long time ago that the first person to speak in a conflict usually loses. The second person sounds defensive. The third sounds desperate. I planned to be the last. The marriage had not ended the way people thought. It had ended quietly, with paperwork and careful language. No shouting, no scenes, just decisions. My wife had always been good at decisions. She liked being seen as reasonable. The children followed her without discussion. Not because they hated me, not even because they were angry. They followed her because she was standing up, and I was sitting down. People mistake stillness for weakness. They always have. I stayed in the house for 3 more weeks after the separation announcement. I slept in the guest room. I ate alone. I listened to the sounds of my own life being reorganized without me. Boxes appeared in the hallway. My things were sorted neatly. I noticed how efficient she was when she believed she was right. The first invitation I did not receive was for my daughter's birthday dinner. The second was a school fundraiser where my name used to be printed on the program. By the third omission, I understood the pattern. I was being erased. That night, I sat at the kitchen table after everyone had gone to bed. The house hummed the way it always had. The refrigerator clicked. The pipes sighed. The clock over the sink ticked. I opened the drawer where I kept old documents. Not because I needed them yet, just to remind myself they were there. I closed the drawer carefully. Not yet, I told myself. Let it spread. Before we go any further, hit the hype button. Take a second to subscribe and like the video. It really helps the channel grow. And tell us in the comments, what would you do in this situation? By the time the rumors reached my workplace, they had gained confidence. My supervisor pulled me aside after a morning meeting. He closed the office door, sat on the edge of his desk, and lowered his voice. "Everything okay at home?" he asked. It was not concern. It was confirmation. He already believed what he had heard. He just wanted to see if I would contradict it. "I'm fine," I said. He nodded, relieved. Not because I was fine, but because I was simple. Simple problems make people comfortable. I worked in operations management, logistics, scheduling, oversight, the kind of job where people forget you exist until something goes wrong. I had built my reputation on being invisible and precise. I let my wife keep the house. That decision alone convinced half our social circle that I was guilty of something. Men who leave marriages without a fight are assumed to be hiding damage. I moved into a small, furnished apartment near the industrial side of town. Nothing temporary about it, but nothing permanent either. Neutral ground. My daughter stopped answering my calls first. My son followed 2 weeks later. The final message I received from either of them was short and polite. "We need time." Time. Another soft word. Another blade wrapped in cotton. The first physical confrontation came sooner than I expected. It happened in the driveway of the house that was no longer mine. I was there to pick up the last of my things. tools, old books, a box of photographs no one else wanted. My son-in-law stood in the garage doorway, arms crossed. He was younger than me by 20 years and built like a man who had never needed to wait for anything. "You can't take that," he said, pointing to a metal storage cabinet. "It belongs to me," I said. He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne, sharp, aggressive. "Mom says you already took what you wanted," he said. "This stays." I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I reached for the cabinet handle. He shoved me, not hard enough to knock me down, hard enough to remind me of gravity. I took a step back. My balance caught. I looked at him and smiled. "Okay," I said. The smile confused him more than anger would have. He wanted resistance. He wanted proof that I was the villain he had been promised. I left without the cabinet. In the parking lot, I sat in my car for a long time before turning the key. My hands were steady, my heart was not. That night, I wrote down the date and the time. I described the shove. I described the witnesses. I described my reaction. I was not collecting evidence. I was collecting leverage. The silence from my children grew louder as the weeks passed. They blocked me on social media. I learned about my own life through secondhand updates. Vacation photos I was not in. Celebrations I had once paid for. My wife sent one message during that time, just one. "We need to stop revisiting this," she wrote. "It's not healthy." I stared at the screen and laughed, out loud, alone. She was right about one thing. It was not healthy. For her. The second action scene unfolded in a place she did not expect me to be. A storage facility on the edge of town. One of those places that smells like dust and motor oil. Rows of doors, echoes that do not belong to anyone. I was there retrieving items from a unit that was still in my name, items my wife assumed were worthless. She arrived unexpectedly, not alone. My daughter was with her, tense, defensive, already rehearsed. "You can't be here," my wife said. "This is inappropriate." "Inappropriate?" I asked. "It's my unit." My daughter stepped forward. "You're making this difficult on purpose." I could hear the script in her voice, the phrases she had practiced in the mirror. I unlocked the unit. Inside were boxes labeled in my handwriting. Financial records, contracts, old agreements, not secrets, just things people forget when they believe they have won. My wife lunged for one of the boxes. I blocked her. She slapped me. It was quick, sharp, more insult than pain. I grabbed her wrist and pushed it away, not gently, not violently, just enough to stop her. The facility manager appeared at the end of the aisle. My wife froze. Her face changed instantly. "He scared me," she said. I released her wrist. "I'm leaving," I told the manager. "I have what I came for." In the car, my daughter screamed at me through the open window. Words tangled together, accusations, threats. I rolled the window up and drove away. That night, I moved the boxes to a safer place. Now they knew, and they were afraid. Fear makes people sloppy. My wife began reaching out to mutual acquaintances. She asked questions that sounded casual. She checked details she should not have needed. My son called me after 6 weeks of silence. "We need to talk," he said. "About what?" I asked. "About moving on." I smiled to myself. Moving on always means moving past something someone else did. We met at a coffee shop near his office. Neutral, public, safe. He did not look at me when he sat down. "Mom says you're holding on to things," he said. "Things that could hurt people." "I have papers," I said. "Nothing more." He swallowed. "You don't need to do this." "Do what?" "This." He gestured vaguely. Our history, his choices, my patience. I leaned forward. "You made your decision," I said. "I'm just accepting it." His hands shook when he stood up. That evening, my wife tried to enter my apartment building. The security desk stopped her. She demanded. She threatened. I watched from the stairwell camera on my phone. She had forgotten something important. I had planned for access years ago, not for revenge, for continuity, for control. I opened my laptop and drafted an email, not angry, not dramatic, just factual. I scheduled it to send. Not yet. The last thing holding them together was the belief that I would not go through with it. People cling to that belief, that someone will stay decent, stay quiet, stay small. The final warning came from my daughter. A voicemail. Her voice was strained. "If you do this," she said, "you'll lose us forever." I listened to it twice. Forever is a long time. Longer than guilt. Longer than fear. I stood in the empty apartment and looked at the boxes stacked against the wall. Years of signatures, agreements, authority that had never been questioned because it never needed to be. I clicked the email open. I added one attachment, then I added another. I did not send it. Not yet. I wanted them all in the same room. They chose the venue themselves. A conference room at a community mediation center downtown, tucked between a dental clinic and an accounting office that advertised audits in block letters. Neutral colors meant to calm people down. Beige walls that absorbed sound instead of reflecting it. Cheap carpet with a pattern designed to hide stains rather than invite attention. Folding chairs arranged in a circle like a group therapy session, equal distance between everyone, as if geometry could manufacture fairness. My wife believed in optics. She always had. She believed places could lend credibility to lies, that if something was said in the right room, with the right lighting and the right tone, it became harder to challenge. She believed neutral spaces made neutral truths. She believed proximity to authority mattered more than substance. I arrived 10 minutes early and sat with my hands folded in my lap, feet flat on the floor, back straight. Calm enough to make people uncomfortable. Calm without effort. Calm that came from having already made peace with outcomes other people were still trying to bargain over. The room smelled faintly of old coffee and disinfectant. There was a plastic water pitcher on a folding table in the corner, untouched. A legal pad with the mediation center's logo sat in front of each chair, along with a pen that felt too light to matter. I did not touch mine. The mediator introduced herself when she came in, cheerful and practiced, smiling too much the way people do when they are trained to believe smiles can soften resistance. She wore a cardigan over a blouse, neutral like the room, and spoke in a voice designed to avoid sharp edges. My wife arrived next. Posture perfect, hair set, expression controlled. She chose the chair directly across from me, the one that put us in direct alignment, like a demonstration. My son and daughter followed her in and took seats beside her, not touching, but aligned. The alignment was intentional. A united front without intimacy. I noticed that too. No one greeted me. No one asked how I was. That had already been decided as irrelevant. "We are here to reach closure," the mediator said, once everyone was seated. Closure. Another word people use when they want control, without admitting it. A word that implies an ending, even when nothing has been resolved. A word that frames resistance as immaturity. My wife spoke first. She always did. She did not wait for the mediator to invite her. She leaned forward slightly, hands folded, voice steady. She talked about emotional abandonment, about how I withdrew, about how I became distant, unavailable, unresponsive. She talked about the children feeling confused and hurt, about the strain it placed on the family, about how silence can be just as damaging as conflict. She used phrases like pattern of behavior and mutual responsibility. She referenced timelines vaguely. She spoke in complete sentences that sounded rehearsed, but natural enough to pass as spontaneous. She did not raise her voice. She did not accuse directly. She let implication do the work. She sounded prepared. She sounded convincing. She sounded like someone who had practiced telling the same story to different audiences until it felt true. I let her finish. The mediator nodded along, occasionally jotting something down on her legal pad. My son stared at the floor, jaw tight. My daughter crossed her arms and leaned back, eyes fixed on a point just past my shoulder, as if looking directly at me required more effort than she was willing to give. When it was my turn, the mediator looked at me with an expression that suggested concern, maybe even sympathy. I recognized the look. It was the look people use when they think they are about to hear an apology. I spoke slowly. I agree with most of what she said, I told the mediator, except the part where I left. My wife frowned, just slightly. A micro-expression she probably did not realize she made. A moment where the script did not account for my response. I never left the marriage, I continued. The marriage left me. The words settled into the room heavier than I expected. Not dramatic, just definitive. The mediator shifted in her seat. The pen paused mid-sentence. My son's shoulders tightened. My daughter uncrossed her arms, then crossed them again, tighter this time. I didn't argue when the story spread, I said. I didn't correct it. I didn't clarify timelines or intentions. I wanted to see who would benefit from it. My wife leaned forward, a hint of irritation breaking through the composure. This isn't productive. It is for me, I said. I did not raise my voice. I did not look at her when I said it. I kept my eyes on the mediator because the point was not confrontation. The point was positioning. I reached into my briefcase and placed a folder on the table between us. Plain manila. No labels, no markings. I did not open it. I did not slide it toward anyone. I simply placed it there and let it exist. The sound it made against the table was soft, but noticeable. I won't discuss this here, I said. This is not the room for it. But you should know that everything you've built since you decided I was disposable is standing on paperwork you forgot I controlled. Silence followed. Not the awkward kind, the recalculating kind. The mediator cleared her throat. Perhaps we should take a break. My wife did not answer her. She was looking at the folder. Then she looked at me. She met my eyes then. Really met them, not with performance, not with anger, with recognition. For the first time, she understood she was not negotiating. She was reacting. I could see it in the way her shoulders stiffened, in the way her breathing changed just slightly. I could see the shift as she replayed decisions in her head, searching for the point where she had assumed I was done, passive, irrelevant. The point where she had mistaken my silence for surrender. The mediator stood up, clearly unsure what to do next. My son finally looked at me, confusion and something like fear flickering across his face. My daughter's expression hardened, but beneath it was uncertainty. They had come expecting a conclusion. They had not come expecting a variable. No one asked what was in the folder. No one asked if I was bluffing. They did not need to. The truth was not in the papers themselves. The truth was in the fact that I had them at all. I closed my briefcase calmly, stood, and nodded once to the mediator. Courtesy, not concession. I think that's enough for today, I said. No one stopped me as I walked out. The hallway smelled the same as when I had arrived. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. Somewhere down the hall, a printer hummed, churning out documents for someone else's quiet conflict. Outside, the city moved on without noticing any of us. Traffic flowed. People crossed the street with coffee cups and phones in their hands. The world did not pause for closure. I stood for a moment on the sidewalk, breathed in the cool air, and felt something settle into place. Not relief, not triumph. Alignment. Whatever they thought this meeting was for, it had served its purpose. The third action scene began in the parking garage beneath the mediation center. It was the kind of garage built to disappear. Low ceilings, concrete walls, painted a tired gray, fluorescent lights buzzing with uneven confidence. Everything echoed there, every sound overstated itself. Tires hissed on the ramp above. I walked toward my car without rushing. I had learned long ago that speed invites pursuit. Calm makes people hesitate. My son followed me. I knew it before I heard him. Panic has weight. It presses on the air. Still, his footsteps echoed too loudly, slapping against the concrete in uneven rhythm. He was trying to catch up without running, as if dignity might still matter if he kept his pace measured. "Wait," he said. I stopped beside my car. I did not turn around. The key was already in my hand, cold metal against my palm, familiar, grounding. "You don't have to destroy everything," he said. His voice cracked on the word everything, stretched thin by urgency. "We can still fix this." Fix. Another word people reach for when they realize they are no longer steering. I turned then, slowly, deliberately. He stood a few feet away, shoulders tight, eyes wide in a way I had not seen since he was a child caught lying about something small. Up close, he looked smaller, not younger, smaller. As if the version of him that had taken up space in rooms, that had spoken over me with borrowed confidence, had been hollowed out by proximity. "You already fixed it," I said. My voice sounded different down there. Flatter, less forgiving. "Just not the way you hoped." His mouth opened, closed. He stepped forward, reached for me, his hand closing around my arm as if muscle memory might still apply, as if he were entitled to physical certainty. I pulled free and shoved him back into a concrete pillar, not hard enough to injure him, hard enough to remind him I was not finished. His back hit with a dull thud that the garage swallowed and repeated. He gasped, more from surprise than pain, and stumbled before catching himself against the wall. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air felt heavy, like it was waiting to see what kind of man he would be next. Security appeared at the far end of the garage. Two figures in reflective vests, walking faster than necessary. I stepped away from my son before they reached us. Distance matters when witnesses arrive. My son slid down the wall and sat there, stunned, his knees bent, his hands resting uselessly on his thighs. He did not look up as the guards approached. He did not call after me. Whatever script he had prepared had ended. I unlocked my car, got in, and closed the door with controlled pressure. The engine started on the first turn. It always had. I pulled out slowly, letting the headlights cut across concrete and shadow, and drove up the ramp into daylight. My hands were steady on the wheel. That surprised me, not because I expected them to shake, but because people like to believe moments like that come with visible aftermath. They expect trembling, deep breaths, regret leaking out through the pores. What I felt instead was alignment, like something long bent had finally straightened. The drive home took 15 minutes. I used all of them. I stopped at lights. I let other cars merge. I did not replay the scene. Replays are indulgent. I thought instead about timing, about sequence, about how many people confuse delay with mercy. At home, the house was quiet, not empty, quiet. There is a difference. I took off my jacket and hung it where it belonged. I washed my hands. The water ran warm, steady, obedient. I watched it carry away nothing visible and still felt lighter. I ate dinner standing at the counter, something simple, something that did not demand attention. Then I sat at my desk. That night, I sent the first email, not to them, to their bank. I did not rush it. I reread it 3 times before attaching anything. The language was precise, neutral, boring even. That was intentional. Drama invites scrutiny. Clarity invites compliance. I attached documents they had not read closely enough. Old agreements, authority clauses, contingencies triggered by misuse, not by malice. The kind of language people skim because it feels administrative. The kind that waits quietly for the right condition to become absolute. I did not accuse, I informed. I explained that certain thresholds had been crossed, that certain approvals had not been obtained, that specific permissions, still technically required, despite years of assumed autonomy, had been revoked. I cited page numbers, paragraphs, dates. I wrote as someone who expected to be understood, not challenged. I sent it just before midnight, late enough to land alone in an inbox, early enough to be the first thing seen in the morning. I shut down the computer and went to bed. Sleep came easily, not deep, but sufficient. The kind that does not argue with you. By morning, accounts were frozen. I knew because the phone started ringing before the sun had fully committed. Operations, legal, compliance. Numbers I recognized and numbers I didn't. Voicemails stacked up like bricks, each one more urgent than the last, each one assuming proximity where there was none. I did not answer. I made coffee instead. I stood by the window and watched the street come alive. People leaving for work. People believing in routines that had not yet betrayed them. I felt no urge to intervene. By mid-morning, the messages changed tone. Fewer demands, more questions. By noon, they were asking how to resolve the situation. By afternoon, they were asking if I would meet. I did not answer then either, because this was only the first action, and for the first time in a long while, the sequence was mine. The fallout was immediate and loud. My wife showed up at my apartment again, this time with my daughter. They pounded on the door. They shouted my name. I watched through the camera feed and did not move. My daughter cried. Real tears. Fear had stripped the performance away. "This isn't what we agreed to," she said to the door. I opened it. They both stepped back as if I had struck them. "This was never an agreement," I said. "This was an assumption." My wife pushed past me and entered the apartment. She looked around as if expecting something grander, something that proved I had been hiding comfort. "This will ruin us," she said. "No," I replied. "It will reset you." She slapped me again, harder this time. I did not touch her. "I still love you," my daughter whispered. "I believe you," I said, "but love without loyalty is just sentiment." They left in silence. That evening, I sent the second email. This one went to the board of a non-profit my wife chaired. I did not accuse her of wrongdoing. I disclosed conflicts of interest she had signed off on without reading. The board suspended her pending review. Her public image fractured in hours. By morning, my phone was useless. Messages stacked until the screen lagged. Numbers I recognized. Numbers I didn't. Old colleagues who had stopped inviting me to things suddenly wanted context. People who had once smiled politely now typed paragraphs, careful and concerned, as if the right tone could pull the ground back into place. I turned the phone face down and made coffee. The apartment smelled like burnt grounds and citrus cleaner. A neighbor upstairs practiced piano scales with aggressive patience. The city outside went about its business, indifferent and exact. I had expected noise. I had not expected confusion. That was the difference. They had prepared for confrontation. They had prepared for pleading. They had prepared for anger, maybe even apology. They had not prepared for documentation, for timelines, for signatures attached to decisions that had always been treated as decorative. At 10, my daughter called again. I let it ring. At 11, my wife texted a single sentence with no punctuation. "You had no right." At noon, the nonprofit released a statement: administrative leave, temporary leadership reassignment, cooperation with internal review, words chosen to reassure donors without naming a cause, words that assumed the public would never read past the headline. They were wrong. Someone posted screenshots. Someone else dug up old meeting minutes. The story jumped platforms the way these things do now, not exploding but spreading, steady and relentless. No outrage language, no theatrics, just a series of calm questions. Why was this vendor chosen? Why were disclosures waived? Why did approvals cluster around the same dates? My wife called again. This time, I answered. "You humiliated me," she said. "No," I replied. "I clarified you." She laughed, sharp and hollow. "You think you're clean in this?" "I don't think that," I said. "I know what I signed, and what I didn't." Silence. Then, quieter. They're asking about our accounts. They should, I said. They always could have. You're enjoying this, she said. I'm resting, I told her, for the first time in years. She hung up. In the afternoon, my landlord emailed to confirm my lease extension. He wrote it the way people do when they want to sound casual but are relieved. No changes, no surprises. I replied with a thank you and closed the laptop. I thought about the word ruin. How often it had been used as a threat. How elastic it was. Ruin your reputation, ruin your family, ruin your future. As if everything worth keeping was made of glass. The truth was simpler. Things don't ruin all at once. They realign. They shed weight. They lose the ability to hide behind momentum. At 3, my daughter showed up alone. I watched the camera feed again. She stood in the hallway, twisting a ring she didn't usually wear. She looked smaller than she had the night before, less certain of her angles. I opened the door. She didn't step back this time. She walked in slowly, as if the floor might tilt. I don't know how to talk to you, she said. Then don't, I replied. Just sit. She did. On the edge of the couch. Hands folded, knees together, like she was waiting to be called on. They're saying Mom might lose everything, she said. They're saying she might have to answer questions, I corrected. That's not everything. She shook her head. You don't understand how this works. I do, I said. I helped build it. She looked up, really looked, the way children do when they realize their parents had lives before them. Why now? She asked. Because now you're grown, I said. And because the cost of staying quiet became higher than the cost of speaking. She swallowed. She's scared. So was I said. For a long time. She nodded slowly. I should have noticed. That's not a debt you owe, I told her. It's a lesson you can keep. She stood to leave, hesitated, then hugged me. It was brief, awkward, real. I don't want to choose, she said. I'm not asking you to, I replied. I already did. After she left, I cleaned the apartment. Not because it was dirty, but because order helps when narratives collapse. I lined books. I folded laundry that was already folded. I wiped a counter that hadn't been used. In the evening, an old friend from work sent a message. Just 3 words. You okay, man? I typed back. Better than okay. That night, I slept without waking. The next days blurred into process. Lawyers spoke carefully. Committees requested extensions. People practiced saying my wife's name in the past tense without meaning to. Invitations stopped, then started again, different ones, from people who had always kept a measured distance. My wife's colleagues released another statement. This one longer. This one included phrases like oversight lapse and governance improvement. It did not include her. She came to the apartment again on the 4th day, alone, composed. The slap had been replaced by calculation. You could stop this, she said. It's not moving, I replied. It's falling. You're destroying years of work. I'm revealing years of shortcuts. She looked at me, searching for something familiar. We were a team. We were a brand, I said. Teams talk. She laughed softly. You always hated that word. I hated what it excused. She stood there a moment longer, then nodded once. You think you've won? I think I'm done, I said. She left without another word. By the end of the week, donors paused contributions. By the end of the month, the nonprofit announced a restructuring. By the end of the quarter, my wife's name was absent from the website. The noise faded. The confusion lingered. My daughter visited more often. Sometimes we talked about logistics. Sometimes about nothing. Sometimes she sat quietly and scrolled while I read. The space between us adjusted, inch by inch. I received an email from the board thanking me for my cooperation. I replied that I had simply answered questions. I didn't attend the hearings. I didn't watch the interviews. I didn't correct the stories that painted me as bitter or strategic or cold. Those were easier narratives than the truth. The truth was unremarkable. I had noticed patterns. I had asked for explanations. I had documented responses. I had waited until the answers stopped coming. One evening, months later, my daughter asked, "Do you regret it?" I thought about the apartment before the noise, the quiet weight of complicity, the way my silence had been interpreted as approval. "No," I said. "I regret the time I spent convincing myself this was normal." She nodded. "I'm trying to unlearn that." "That's all anyone can do," I told her. The city outside had changed seasons. The piano upstairs had learned a new piece. The coffee tasted better. I did not feel victorious. I felt aligned. And for the first time in a long while, that was enough. And the final gathering took place at a fundraising gala my wife had spent years building. Black tie, donors, photographers, applause timed to speeches. I was not on the guest list. I walked in anyway. The venue was a restored theater downtown, the kind with velvet curtains and gold leaf trim that tries to remind you of permanence. Valets moved with quiet choreography outside. Inside, waitstaff floated between tables with practiced smiles, carrying glasses that caught the light just long enough to be noticed. Every detail had been calibrated to reassure money that it was doing something meaningful. I paused just past the entrance, letting the room register me on its own terms. A few heads turned, a few brows furrowed. No one said my name. That was important. Recognition without announcement creates its own gravity. The fourth and final action scene unfolded on the stage itself. My wife was mid-speech when she saw me. Her voice faltered. The microphone picked it up. She recovered quickly. She always did. Years of boardrooms and panels had trained her to absorb disruption and keep moving. But the pause had already happened. A fraction of a second too long. Enough for the audience to sense a shift they couldn't explain. I walked down the center aisle, past tables where donors sat with hands folded and expressions carefully neutral. Some recognized me. Others recognized the tension around me. Phones stayed down. This crowd prided itself on discretion, on letting moments happen before deciding what they meant. I stepped onto the stage calmly and took the spare microphone from the stand. "I won't take long," I said. My voice carried cleanly. The sound engineer didn't touch the levels. Security glanced at each other, then at the event coordinator. No one likes to interrupt certainty, especially when it's dressed correctly and walking with purpose. "I've heard a lot about myself recently," I continued. "About how I walked away. About how I abandoned my family." A few murmurs moved through the room. Not outrage, curiosity. I gestured toward my wife. "This woman is very good at stories." She stiffened, the way people do when they know interruption is coming but don't yet know its shape. I turned to the audience. "But stories need footnotes." I nodded once toward the technician at the side of the stage. He hesitated, then did what he'd been instructed to do earlier that afternoon. The screen behind us came to life. The first slide was plain, no dramatic headline, just a scanned document, a familiar letterhead, a signature at the bottom, my wife's name, clear and unmistakable, a date highlighted in the corner. I didn't accuse, I didn't editorialize. I let silence do the work. "These are approvals," I said, "routine ones, the kind that move quickly because everyone trusts the process." I advanced the slide. Another document, another signature, a clause highlighted, small but specific. "And these are the disclosures attached to them," I continued, "the ones we're all supposed to read." A soft gasp rippled through the room. Not horror, recognition. I kept going. Dates aligned, names repeated, relationships implied but never stated, patterns emerging without commentary. "None of this is illegal," I said, anticipating the defense before it could be raised. "That's important. This isn't about crimes, it's about governance, about what we notice, about what we don't." My wife stepped toward me, her hand outstretched. "This is not the place," she said into her microphone, voice tight but controlled. I stepped back. She followed, one heel catching the edge of the stage carpet. The moment stretched. Not dramatically, not dangerously. Just enough. She slipped and fell. The sound was small, a sharp intake of breath, the scrape of fabric, a collective flinch from the audience as they recalibrated what they were witnessing, enough to be seen. I lowered my microphone and waited as staff rushed forward. She waved them off, embarrassed more than hurt, pushing herself up with stiff dignity. Her face had changed. Not panic. Calculation had given way to something closer to exposure. I spoke again, quietly now. "I didn't come to embarrass anyone," I said. "I came to correct the record." I looked out over the room. Faces were attentive, not hostile. People who give money for influence listen carefully when influence is explained back to them. "For years I stayed silent because silence was easier," I said. "Because I told myself that raising questions would damage something fragile. Tonight, you've seen how fragile it really is." I nodded to the screen one last time, where the final slide sat unchanged. No new reveal, just the accumulation of what was already there. "I'll step off the stage now," I said. "You can return to your program, or you can ask better questions." I placed the microphone back on its stand and walked down the steps without looking back. No one stopped me. Outside, the night air felt cooler than I expected. The valet offered to retrieve a car I didn't have. I thanked him and declined. I walked a few blocks instead, letting the noise of the city replace the echo of applause that never came. My phone buzzed once, a message from my daughter. "Are you okay?" I replied. "I'm fine," and I meant it. Behind me, the gala continued in some altered form. Speeches adjusted, conversations recalibrated, donations reconsidered. By morning, the photos would be online, the captions would be cautious. By afternoon, the board would convene. By evening, statements would be drafted. I would not be mentioned much after that. That was the point. I went home to my apartment, hung up the jacket I'd worn for the occasion, and sat by the window as the city settled. There was no rush left in me, no next move waiting to be executed. The story had its footnotes now. Everything else would take care of itself. My children stood frozen at the side of the stage. I looked at them and felt nothing, not anger, not sadness, just completion. They looked smaller up there than they had in my memory, not physically, situationally, like people who had stepped into a story too late and realized they were standing in the wrong chapter. My son's jaw was tight, eyes darting between me and their mother, calculating consequences the way he always had. My daughter's hands were clasped in front of her, knuckles pale, the practiced confidence she wore in public stripped away by proximity. For years I had imagined what it would feel like to look at them in a moment like this. I had assumed there would be a surge of something, vindication, pain, relief, some emotional punctuation mark that would signal arrival. There was nothing, just a clean edge, like finishing a long task and putting the tool down. "This ends now," I said into the microphone. "For all of us." The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They landed the way statements do when they aren't looking for approval. For a brief second, no one moved. The room seemed to hold its breath, unsure whether this was still part of the program or something unscripted that required intervention. Eyes flicked toward security, toward event staff, toward donors who might signal how this was supposed to be received. Then security finally moved. Hands on my arms, polite, firm, exactly as trained, not aggressive, not apologetic. Their professionalism was almost comforting. It meant the moment had passed from spectacle into procedure. "I'm fine," I said, not resisting. They nodded, grateful for cooperation. No one likes a scene within a scene. I let them escort me off stage. As my feet hit the floor of the aisle, the room exploded into noise. Chairs scraping, voices overlapping, the sudden release of tension people had been holding without realizing it. Conversations ignited instantly, everyone trying to place themselves on the correct side of what had just happened before the narrative settled. Someone laughed nervously. Someone else said a name too loudly. Phones came out now, finally, no longer pretending restraint. The hum rose and fractured, 1,000 private reactions competing for dominance. I walked steadily, guided but not rushed. I didn't look back at the stage. I didn't look at my children again. Not because I didn't care, because looking back would have suggested there was something left to negotiate. As I reached the exit, my wife screamed my name. It wasn't theatrical. It wasn't controlled. It tore out of her, sharp and raw, stripped of all the composure she had curated over years. For a moment, the noise behind me collapsed inward, drawn to that sound. I did not turn around. That was the hardest part, not because I wanted to, because I knew that if I did, it would reopen something I had already closed. Turning around would have been an invitation to explanation, to argument, to revision. I pushed through the doors and stepped outside. The night air was cool and sharp. It cut through the heat of the room and the weight of the moment with surgical precision. I inhaled deeply, the smell of asphalt and distant rain grounding me in something solid and immediate. The city didn't care what had just happened. Traffic moved. A bus hissed at the curb. Somewhere down the block, someone laughed into a phone, unaware that a small universe had just rearranged itself inside a ballroom a few hundred feet away. I stood there for a second longer than necessary, letting my pulse slow, letting the last fragments of adrenaline burn off without being given a direction to go. I took one step forward, then another. Each step felt deliberate, not symbolic. I wasn't walking away from them. I was walking toward something that didn't require performance or defense, toward a life where silence was no longer mistaken for consent. Behind me, doors opened and closed. Voices spilled out briefly, then were swallowed by the street. I didn't slow down. As I walked, images surfaced uninvited. Dinners where I had been talked over. Decisions framed as already made. Smiles offered to rooms full of people while conversations at home were reduced to bullet points and expectations. Years of telling myself that stability required compromise, that timing mattered, that there would be a better moment to speak. This had been that moment. Not because it was dramatic, because it was final. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't check it. Whatever was waiting could wait longer. For once, urgency didn't belong to anyone else. I reached the corner and crossed without looking back. The light was green. The city allowed it. By the time I reached my apartment, the jacket I'd worn to blend in with the room felt like a costume. I hung it carefully, not with reverence, but with closure. It had served its purpose. I poured a glass of water and drank it slowly, standing at the counter. My hands were steady. That surprised me more than anything else. Later, much later, there would be conversations, explanations demanded, versions of events competing for dominance. My children would ask questions they weren't ready to hear the answers to. My wife would tell her story again, adjusting it this way and that, searching for a configuration that preserved something familiar. I would not participate. I sat by the window and watched the city lights blink on, one by one. Completion doesn't feel like triumph. It feels like silence after a long, sustained noise, like stepping out of a room where you've been holding your breath and realizing you don't need to anymore. For the first time, there was no next move, and that was enough.